Morning everyone, welcome to only our second video update for our SIO members. It is a chilly morning here in Cape Town. I hope those of you in South Africa are keeping warm. Today I want to discuss two things like with the previous video. Firstly, looking at the charts, the technical analysis which still are indicating short-term bearishness, and then also the on-chain or blockchain analytics which are painting a bit more of a positive picture. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, let's have a look at the big picture first. This is the weekly chart, and as you can see, the price is trending downwards since the sell-off that began, I think it was on the 12th of May. If we look at the daily chart, everything is red and trending downwards, although the last week or two we have been pretty flat in a tight range. So nothing too positive there, and as you can see, we've got an additional sell indicator that just came through yesterday. Okay, for a bit more granular insight, let's look at Bitcoin on shorter time frames. I have the 1 hour chart open here, and I've drawn these trend lines since the early days after the sell-off, and you'll see how trend lines can start off as lines of support but then become resistance, or they can start off as lines of resistance and then later on become support. To give you a better idea of what I'm talking about, let's zoom in a little bit. Like I said, we had some good uptrend support here, thinking that possibly we would break out after the major sell-off to the upside, but that support was broken, and eventually it became resistance here, it became resistance here, and it acted as resistance over here. Let's look at the yellow lines which started off as lines of resistance. This was one of the first resistance trend lines I had drawn, and up until this particular point, it was very good in terms of acting as resistance. We had a breakout to the upside, but then this particular trend line caused havoc and the price was rejected all the way down again. And it continued acting as resistance, as you can see here. And as time went on, I started drawing some new trend lines. For example, we had a trend line of support here, which we were hoping served as an indication that we would have some more upside coming through, but the price broke down and eventually it acted as resistance and the price failed all the way to the downside. And I then drew some new trend lines. This one over here, for example, which acted as support, and yes, that is support as long as the line doesn't cut the body of the candle. The price broke down and it acted as resistance. This was, I think it was a trend line that I drew yesterday, and we failed to maintain this particular support as well. So things on a short-term basis do look rather bearish. If I bring on board my indicators, you will see that the RSI is really low at around 34. And if I switch on some of my other indicators, let's have a look. Yep, we are still in a strong sell mode. So as you can see, the traditional technical analysis based on the charts don't look good. So now let's have a look at some on-chain data. Okay, the first chart that I would like to show you is one that shows you the total Bitcoin reserves sitting across all of the exchanges. Typically what happens is when you see the number of Bitcoins being sent to exchanges increasing, you can generally see down the line increased selling pressure, because that is what happens. People send their Bitcoins, especially the big institutional players, unlike retail. They'll send their Bitcoins from their cold wallets to the exchanges in order to sell them at some future point. So this is what happened here. If you look at this red line, which indicates the Bitcoin exchange reserves, it has been steadily decreasing. It created that supply shock, which saw an increase in the Bitcoin price, which is represented by this black line here. Similarly, we saw a renewed increase in the Bitcoin exchange reserves over here, and the price started plummeting as well. Now, the next chart. Okay, this particular chart is what is called the miners position index, and it's really an indication of how much Bitcoin is leaving miner wallets to go to exchanges to be sold. You'll see here in the beginning, we had a lot of miners sending Bitcoins through to the exchanges, and as a result, we started seeing the increase in the price losing its momentum and eventually gearing up for a sell-off. The good news, though, is, as you can see here, for a long time now, since the price topped and came down, the position index is really, really low. And again, this is now an indication that the selling pressure is really reduced, and in fact, we are seeing a bit of a supply shortage building up. Okay, the next data set that I want to show you relates to the ownership of Bitcoin based on how long Bitcoin has been owned by whom. So effectively, we've got three groups or three categories of Bitcoin holders in this particular graph here. We have those who have held Bitcoin for more than a year. They're called the hodlers. The cruisers, which have held Bitcoin anywhere between 1 and 12 months. And then there are the traders, represented by this yellow, which indicate those Bitcoin owners who have only held Bitcoin for less than a month. And the good news is that this particular group here, the traders, are the ones who have been reducing as a proportion of the whole over time. If we scroll further down, you will see that the hodlers in absolute value terms has been increasing. If you look at the cruisers in absolute value terms, they have been increasing in number. If you look at the traders, since the highs earlier this year, they have been dropping off. And this is the latest data. So you can see we had just over 16% of Bitcoin addresses holding Bitcoin for less than a month drop. So what does this mean? Well, effectively it means that the shorter term traders are being flushed out of the system, and conviction buyers, those who understand the value of Bitcoin, are only increasing in number. And then, just out of interest, let's have a quick look at what is happening in the derivatives space. What we have here is some Glassnode data that shows you the open interest on futures and open interest on options across all of the exchanges. And you will see that, for the most part, these have been declining. Likewise, with futures volumes and options volumes, we have seen a massive downtrend lately. What this indicates is that a lot of the leveraged trading, derivative trading, is being flushed out of the system, and whatever price increases we are going to be seeing going forward will likely be spot driven. Okay, then, to really drive the point home, I just want to end off with the last bit of data sets I want to show you, which relates to the holders of Bitcoins on a more granular level. In this particular chart, which goes all the way back to 2010, the beginning of Bitcoin, the number of holders that have held Bitcoin for either more than 10 years, 7 to 10 years, or 5 to 7 years has just steadily been increasing. If we look at the number of Bitcoin holders that have held Bitcoin between 1 and 2 years, or between 6 months and 12 months, represented by these yellow and darker yellow waves, you will see that over recent times, after we've had this major sell-off, that number has been increasing. And then lastly, if we look at the holders of Bitcoin who have held Bitcoin between 3 and 6 months, 1 to 3 months, or even 1 week to 1 month, they are the ones which over the last period of time have been dropping off. So bottom line is that much of the froth and speculative nonsense is being washed out, and there are other data sets which I could show you, but I won't. It just shows you that the whales, and miners are whales as well, they are busy scooping up the Bitcoin at these levels. And in fact, if I look at the top 30 whales, they have hardly done any transactions since the 24th of June. So they are just waiting and biding their time for their buy orders to be filled in when the price drops. And this is why I said in our message yesterday that I do believe a floor is being created at the current levels, and that whatever capitulation we may see below the $30,000 range will be temporary because of all of the facts that I've just outlined in this video. All right, everyone, that is it for me. So short term, the charts look bearish, but on a longer term basis, if we look at the fundamentals from the on-chain data, things are looking okay. So nothing to worry about for the medium to long term. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you.